Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we are looking at a phenomenon where we have a desire to clean or declutter, and yet we find that the only way we can get ourselves motivated to step into the project is through buying new organizer bins, rearranging furniture, or ultimately doing something that creates novelty or newness in our surroundings. So why is it that rearranging furniture motivates us to declutter all the things around it? And we kind of have to start by looking at dopamine, which is sometimes considered a feel-good neurotransmitter, but really is more tied to motivation and also anticipation and reward. Not necessarily always just about pleasure, but it's kind of what gets us moving towards goals. So when we introduce novelty or something new into our environment, like those shiny new organizing bins or a freshly rearranged room, our brain's reward system lights up, and this novelty can help to trigger dopamine release in the hippocampus, giving us that little burst of motivation that we may need to tackle tasks that we otherwise might consider tedious or that we avoid. Sometimes the simple decision to clean on its own isn't enough to overcome all of the barriers, including time limitations, energy limitations, and other priorities that compete for our attention, our time, and energy. Because our brains are designed to be a bit cautious in starting a big new project. First of all, if you've done it before, where you've just kind of cleaned and decluttered your entire home, we have a pre-existing understanding of how much actually will end up going into that project and the size of it. And we're a little bit cautious and conservative naturally, because once you do, you know that it takes over your mind and it becomes more prominent, and that can sometimes push other things to the back burner. So having something that's a little bit new, a little bit exciting, and gets a little bit of that dopamine release can help to overcome that initial resistance or barrier. There's also a component of decision fatigue. One of the reasons why clutter accumulates in the first place is because we don't want to spend the mental energy in making the decision about where to put it. Sometimes it could just be a lack of actual real estate to put things, and other times it's an item that you just can't decide for sure exactly where it should go. And as a result, we accumulate sort of piles of things, and each item that we've accumulated requires a decision to be made. Do we keep it? Do we donate it? Do we throw it away? Or do we need to put it somewhere else? And all of that decision making is found by the brain to be mentally exhausting. So sometimes there's a sense that having a new organizational system or new organizational tools will help to reduce the number of decisions, because we now have categories and a home for items to go to. And that could look like new filing system or new labels being put on some type of organizer or box. So it's more than just having storage, it's also a decision-making shortcut in having the categories. And when we do a rearrangement of the space or introduce new items or elements into it, we also get a bigger sense of control and agency over the space, kind of like a sense of autonomy that can help to trigger more of those neurochemical responses and rewards, and a feeling of stability in something that feels chaotic. So often the world feels chaotic, and sometimes our homes feel chaotic, and getting a handle on those physical items can sometimes help to bring control into the chaos. Another important element is that having all of that clutter actually creates cognitive overload in the background of our mind. And when we're there looking at disorganized spaces, we may not be consciously noticing and taking it in. At a subconscious level, our brains actually have to work harder to filter through all of that visual noise, which leaves us with fewer mental resources for the tasks. Each item that's competing in our visual field is competing for neural representation in our brain. And so when we clean and organize a specific area, we create some visual contrast that can help us to motivate getting through the rest of it. But obviously, it is not always realistic to have a lot of new novelty, to buy a lot of new things like those organizational tools. So there are other ways that you can sort of hack that same reward system without having to spend to do it. So simply rearranging or moving things around, furniture and other items, can provide enough novelty to trigger some of that dopamine response. You can also have kind of your own personalized dopamine menu of things that work well for you. So for example, for some people, they get enough of a sense of satisfaction by simply focusing on one drawer and doing like a quick 5-minute clean out of that one small space, or doing like speed purges, like setting a goal for yourself to find 10 things in a space to get rid of, to donate or throw away, or reorganizing a small area. Now that doesn't work for everyone, and I think it's important to note that people that are neurodivergent often have different methods and strategies that they need to be able to use when they are approaching a project like this. So it's common advice to be told, just start with one small area, just start with one little portion of a room. But actually, sometimes when you begin that way, the items that you're tackling are actually tied to other spaces in the home. For example, if you don't have enough space in your kitchen, all of the cabinets are full, and some kitchen items have accumulated somewhere else in the home, in the living room or something like that, or a junk drawer perhaps, tackling those items will also end up becoming like a thread that ties back to the kitchen, which maybe then ties back to another space. So it all kind of ties together like little threads. And when you start to pull that one thread, kind of the whole thing starts to become part of the project. And so then we have the snowball method, where you start with one small area and it slowly pulls into tackling all of the rest of the areas. And sometimes that can really feel overwhelming. And so I think it's important to be very self-aware to determine what your personal strategy is, rather than following a cookie cutter strategy offered by someone who doesn't have your brain. I have found for myself that the traditional advice of spending 5 minutes a day does not work very well for me. I am much more successful if instead I set aside like a day or two of doing nothing else, assuming that that is actually possible, or an evening perhaps of doing nothing else, where I have multiple hours where I can go thread to thread and be able to jump from space to space and move around through those different things as they all tie together, rather than just trying to do one little area or one room at a time. So being a little bit self-reflective is helpful in understanding the types of actual methods that will work for you. Some people also will feel a reward by taking before and after pictures to get a little bit of anticipation and then also some satisfaction at the other side. Talking about it for some, making it more of a social process, can be helpful for some. Again, not necessarily for everyone. And traditional advice around just doing it or pushing through often fails to acknowledge neurobiological differences, especially with neurodivergence. So they may be helped by finding other forms of dopamine release, and that can vary per individual. So we talked about social aspects. Some people like body doubling. Some people find it beneficial to use a timer. Some people find it beneficial to gamify the experience. So setting out a little bit of a goal for each little section that you're doing, like we talked about finding 10 things, maybe in 10 minutes or something along those lines, where you're achieving in smaller increments, and then you can celebrate those smaller increments and experience that dopamine release each time a smaller goal is achieved, without limiting yourself to only working in one small space. You can also use things like music as motivation. So some people will find it very rewarding to have the dopamine release from listening to something that they really enjoy. For others, it may be listening to a podcast or story or an audio book. I probably like a mix between music and podcasts. I find that when I'm listening to podcasts, I do feel like it's probably almost a sense of there being someone else there, but I'm also not required to listen to every word they're saying. When I get really highly involved in what I'm doing, it's okay for me to tune it out as long as it's not something that I really need to hang on to every word. Music is also nice because you can choose music to suit the energy that you want to match. So if you're feeling a little bit low energy, you could choose some music that's just slightly above the energy level where you are that might pull you up just a little bit. And then you can gradually increase like the tempo or the rhythm of what you're listening to add a little bit more to your energy system. And again, ultimately, it just comes down to being self-aware, noticing which things have worked for you well in the past, which things have not worked well for you in the past, which types of strategies have allowed you to actually start and ultimately finish projects like this. And that can be applied to really any bigger project that you are entering into. I think that it's helpful to get advice and it's nice to get tips from people who understand how our minds work, but I also think it's just as important that you have a self-awareness because we are all motivated a little bit differently, and that dopamine release does not necessarily work exactly the same for everyone. So noticing what works well for you and tailoring and customizing the process to yourself is probably going to be your ultimate best strategy. And if you are looking for additional motivation or incentives or a little bit of a rejuvenation process for your brain perhaps afterwards, you might enjoy my mindset membership, which includes tools like hypnosis, yoga nidra, meditation, EFT tapping. There are specific hypnosis audios around motivation, projects, and gathering the energy needed to engage in a new project. And all of that information is available in the show notes. And until we connect the next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.